For the millionth time this season, we need to talk about the tropics, as things are likely to heat up again as we go into the end of this month into early November in the Caribbean Sea, where we could see a tropical storm and maybe even a hurricane develop, and that could be something that impacts land, including maybe the Greater Antilles and perhaps even the United States. So let's jump into what's happening across the tropics right now and what will eventually set the stage for a tropical system in the Caribbean Sea. So let's begin with the Atlantic Basin, and this is what we have left of Hurricane Oscar, which is actually now the remnants of Oscar. This is continuing to lift to the north. It is a disorganized area of showers and thunderstorms that is heading in the direction of Bermuda and is no longer expected to be anything tropical. But this was a hurricane at one point that made landfall in Cuba, and it was actually a pretty impressive hurricane. It really rapidly intensified, what the smallest hurricane that we've seen all season long in the Atlantic Ocean, but that is officially done. What is left now is a very prime environment across the Caribbean Sea. Now, we don't expect any development over the next 7 days in the Caribbean. However, it is a very low shear environment with very high oceanic heat content, and that should allow for eventual development in the Caribbean Sea as we go into early November. Now, back over in the Pacific Ocean, we don't usually talk about the Pacific, but I wanted to point this out because what this is here is a hurricane, and this is actually what came from Tropical Storm Nadine that made landfall in Belize and the Yucatan Peninsula only a few days ago. So that crossed over Mexico and is now into the Pacific Ocean as a completely separate named storm, and it is actually a hurricane. Although we don't expect any development over the next 6 to 7 days in the Atlantic Basin, we do think that we are going to see a hard reset in the Caribbean Sea because there has not been really any activity in the Caribbean for the last few weeks aside from Nadine. So I think the Caribbean Sea is in a very favorable position right now as we go into early November. A few reasons why. We are forecasting low wind shear across this area, which means that any developing system will be able to organize relatively quickly. There's also high oceanic heat content, which means the water temperatures essentially are very warm right now, and they are also warm for this time of the year. They are still running 3 to 4 degrees above average, which should lead to development here in early November. Our environment right now in the Caribbean Sea is more typical for the early or mid portion of October. So this is a very favorable environment right now, and so we are expecting that some sort of tropical cyclone will likely develop. Now, one question you're probably asking is, if something develops here in the Caribbean Sea, where would it go? Would it go into the Gulf? Would it go to the north, east of Florida? Would it go towards Florida? Would it go to the east? Would it go northeast? Where would it exactly go? Well, that's a big question mark that we're going to hopefully be able to try to decipher for you here over the next few minutes as we run through some of the computer models. However, it is basically a wild card right now where this will go. Now, a typical November pattern leans in favor of something going east of Florida, more into the southwestern Atlantic Ocean. However, we are really in a weird time of the year right now where the weather is really above average, so we could see something completely different from what is typical in the climatological sense of things. And the latest global hazards outlook across the Atlantic Basin has just come out from the Climate Prediction Center, and so over the next week or two, really from October 30th until November 5th, they do have a medium chance of development currently outlined in the Caribbean Sea. Now, the National Hurricane Center doesn't officially have anything yet in the next 7 days, and that is because it's only covering the next 7 days. This right here would be somewhere between day 8 to about day 13 or 14. There's also a low chance of development just north of the Lesser Antilles, and even beyond the first week of November, we might even see some development as we get closer to the middle of November. Now let's talk more about the potential of where this could go and how intense this system could get if it does end up developing. And to begin with, we're going to look at the GEFS ensemble members, and essentially what this is a group of different ensemble members all embedded into one graphic to show you both the intensity of what this system could be and also where it could end up going. So this is around October 30th. Notice we have several different ensemble members with low pressure systems here in the central Caribbean Sea. All those red numbers indicating the pressure level, the last 2 digits of pressure across the central Caribbean Sea in terms of the low pressure system. So as we go into Wednesday and Thursday of next week, you'll notice that the GEFS ensemble members are indicating that there is likely to be some level of development by the middle or end of next week. Now, before we go further into this, I do want to point out that this is obviously a week away from now, and we don't have any low pressure center that's developed developed yet. So this is a very fluid situation. There's nothing that's developed yet. We are not expecting any development for the next 7 days or so. So anything that does develop here is very unknown of where it'll actually end up heading. But I do want to talk about this in today's video, because if something ends up developing here in the Caribbean, it could go big. And that's why we're talking about it in today's video. Let's go further though into Halloween and eventually into early November. You'll notice that the ensemble members are in a very high agreement for being over 7 days out, showing several various areas here with at least some sort of tropical storm, if not some of them even bringing hurricane intensity by early November. This is again November 1st. By the 2nd and the 3rd, notice how large the spread is here across the Caribbean Sea and even one system going into the Gulf of Mexico. And again, all these ensemble members are showing the same exact tropical storm or even hurricane, but all in different areas essentially. So the spread is obviously very large here. So where is this exactly going to go? Well, at least the GEFS ensemble members are showing, again, a very large spread. We don't really know where this is going to go. However, the general consensus is that most of these are going off to the north and east, which would be climatologically correct for this time of the year. Usually in November, tropical cyclones that do develop are more than likely to lift more to the north and northeast rather than towards the Gulf of Mexico. With that said, there are a few of these ensemble members. There's actually about 5 or 6 that bring this in the direction of the Gulf of Mexico, several of them crashing it into Florida or into the Yucatan Peninsula. But on the flip side of things, about 60 to 70% of the ensemble members are bringing this into the northeast, going into the Atlantic Ocean, mostly impacting the Greater Antilles and the Lesser Antilles. So what I'm basically trying to tell you is that we are still over 7 days out. There's a lot of uncertainty, but I still think that this is important to talk about because this could end up developing. And if it does develop, we'll have to watch this closely, I think, in Florida. I also want to mention that hurricanes are being pushed to the back of people's minds right now because we're going into fall. People are thinking winter storms are coming. But again, right now we're about a month behind in schedule in terms of the water temperatures in the Atlantic Ocean. They are still well above average. We are basically in early October as we go into early November for the hurricane season. I know it sounds weird, but that's kind of where we're at right now. So again, don't let your guard down right now, even if you're in Florida or in the United States. Hopefully we don't see this impact the United States, but again, there is at least that slim chance if something develops, we could see some impacts here. The EPS ensemble members, which are the European ensemble members, also show a very large spread of low pressure centers as we go into next weekend around November 3rd. And again, notice how all of them are all over the place in the Caribbean Sea. Again, this particular group of ensemble members also showing high confidence of there being something that develops. For reference, this is the GFS model run, which does indicate tropical cyclone development as we go into around Halloween. Again, this particular model kind of shows two weird things, one of which actually shows a different tropical storm developing and crashing into like eastern Florida as we go into the end of the month. Again, this would be an interesting scenario if this happened, because we would literally have 2 different tropical cyclones within like 300 miles of each other. Very interesting stuff. You'll kind of notice how they spin around each other though. So if something like this develops, it could be interesting. Again, if a tropical storm were to develop east of Florida, it would more than likely be very weak. And then notice how the GFS model doesn't show really any major intensification compared to some of the ensemble members, but it actually slingshots it to the east into the southwestern Atlantic Ocean. So again, definitely gonna be something to watch for. Make sure you're subscribed to the channel. We'll continue to keep you posted with the latest on the tropics. Away from the hurricanes, let's talk a little bit more about what's happening in the United States over the next couple of days. And the reason why I want to talk about this is because we could have a sneaky severe weather event happen tomorrow evening, and we might be going live for that tomorrow. So make sure you are subscribed to the channel. This is what we're talking about. We got a little shortwave trough that is going to be moving across the central and northern plains. This low pressure system won't look like much even on the jet stream level. However, there will be some wind shear, and it's actually going to be a very favorable wind shear environment across parts of the central plains tomorrow evening, to the point where if storms do fire, which is a big if, we actually could see the potential for damaging winds, large hail, and maybe even a couple of tornadoes. So this is what it looks like tomorrow evening. Capping is expected to be a problem, meaning that we have a lid on the atmosphere that prevents storms from building up, but we should eventually see storms develop around sunset tomorrow evening. That should be mostly from central Iowa back through northeastern Kansas. I think the biggest problem threat will actually be in northwest Missouri and northeast Kansas, where large hail will be the biggest concern. However, if storms can become more surface-based, we actually could see a tornado or two evolve. That's going to be very contingent on there being enough moisture in the environment. So this is by around 9 to 10 o'clock. Notice how these storms really firing off from Kansas City back into southern Iowa. This will probably be mostly semi-discrete storms initially, and then it will eventually become more linear, meaning we'll transition from hail and tornado threat more into a wind threat as we go later into the evening hours and eventually into the overnight hours showers. This is a dying line of thunderstorms as it moves into Illinois and also parts of central and eastern Missouri. So again, very small scale threat, but if something does look concerning tomorrow, since it's a high populated area, we will be live on the channel, so make sure you are subscribed down below. It's the final countdown. We are currently looking at 8 days until the 500,000 subscriber merch is gone forever. If you want to get it, it is at shopmaxvelocity.net. It's also the top link in the description below. You can pick up a hat, t-shirt, mug, sticker, or even a beanie today at shopmaxvelocity.net. Thank you so much for watching.